I'm Erica Lynn, and we all know the ocean is the most demanding environment on Earth, consistently testing the reliability and durability of our equipment. When you spend as much time fishing as I do, you know that reliable gear is essential for staying on the water. This is why I went with the Abyss battery to power my trolling motor, electronics, and outboard. The guys at Abyss Battery are rattling the saltwater industry by manufacturing performance marine batteries specifically designed for sonar, outboards, trolling motors, and electronic fishing reels. They're also Bluetooth compatible, so I found checking battery statuses right on your phone while you're out on the water is a huge game changer. To learn more about why Abyss batteries are used by the pros and factory installed by premier boat builders, visit abyssbattery.com.
Fishing like a local isn't just about catching fish. It's about connecting with the environment and the people who call it home. It's about hearing the stories and traditions that have been passed down for generations and sharing unforgettable moments with the people you meet along the way. Fishing like a local is having an experience that stays with you forever. And with Fishing Booker, you can experience it too, no matter where you are. Discover your next adventure on Fishing Booker.
Hello and welcome to the Publicly Challenged Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Oswald, and I hope you join me on my quest for knowledge to become a better public land hunter, angler, and forager. Stick with this and who knows, maybe we will learn something together. All right, so I'm sitting here and I am talking to Jesse Akozbek. And Jesse, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I would love to. My name is Jesse Akozbek, and I run the platform Feral Foraging. It's an education platform which is focused on empowering people and giving them the tools that they need to be confident, ethical, and effective foragers. That's my goal.
I like that. So confident, effective, and what was the one?
And ethical.
Ethical. So let's kind of talk about that, the ethics of foraging. I think that's a good thing to talk about. So can we kind of get into that a little bit? What do you mean by ethical?
Yeah, so generally speaking, and I guess it fits into my grand scheme of why I care about foraging and why I want to teach other people about foraging. So I think that one of the biggest problems that we're facing today is the loss of natural habitat and natural land. And I think that one of the most effective ways that we can start to reverse that process, to go in the other direction of gaining some of it back, is by cultivating and building people that have a deep investment and a deep relationship with their land. I think foraging is one of the best ways to do that. But along the way, if I were, as an educator, to only teach people about here's this plant here, here's that plant there, you can use this one this way and this one that way, I would be doing a huge disservice. I need to teach you first about how to forage in a way that we all can forage before we all just go out and start picking every plant that we see in the woods. And ethics is one of the most important things there. So I think that if we teach as many people as possible to be ethical foragers, that it's my way of trying to fight this battle of bringing back and capturing back native land and natural spaces.
No, I like that. So what's funny about that is, as I started, and you and I talked about a little bit before we actually started this recording, that I did come from a hunting space, and that hunting space is different. A lot of times, especially on private land, people will clear cut things to make room for food plots and destroy some of the natural vegetation that's there in order to grow other things. Some of them are even invasives that they plant to try and attract the deer. And as I started down my foraging journey, not that I ever did that much with planting food plots and stuff, but I started realizing food sources, one that I would eat, one that the deer would eat, recognizing whether or not they're a native species or an invasive species, and that all came from that foraging aspect to where I developed that relationship with the plants. And now I can take my children and show them and say, look, this is important because it actually, puts nitrogen back into the soil and it helps other plants grow. Or this does this and it has a relationship with that. And then, their eyes light up and they're like, wow, everything's connected, Dad. And I'm like, yeah, I wish I would have realized that at 5 and 7 years old, So it's really neat to see that. And I can tell, when you're talking about that, that's kind of what you're explaining when you're saying you wanted them to develop that relationship so their eyes can be open too. And destruction of habitat, you don't ever really think about a hunter destroying the habitat, but they do as well. And so many other aspects, we're losing so much of it that, I try anytime I can to educate, my children and others that they can learn from it. So I think it's a pretty good thing and a great way to try and educate people.
Right. Well, and so I talk about hunting a lot, and I use it basically as an example of why. So I try to convince, or I've tried to convince public land management entities that they should allow foraging and regulate it. So like if someone wants to hunt for mushrooms on this piece of public land, people should be able to buy a permit to forage for mushrooms or what have you. And I always point to hunting as something that is a parallel to that. Instead of going for mushrooms, we're hunting, or we're, hunting, foraging for animals, and showing that, at least to my eyes, it's been a huge success. And through hunting and hunters buying a permit every year, that money is going back into the land. I have a hunter friend of mine. He said, even if you don't hunt, if you're a conservationist, if you care about the land, you should get a hunting license, because that money goes into conserving the land further. So it's all part of the same thing. And I would love to see more programs like that, because in many ways, I think that a lot of times maybe people have good intentions, but the money just isn't there. The funds aren't there. And so this is yet another way that we can increase that and to bring more funding to preserving our spaces, but preserving them in a way that, not that we aren't doing this already, but that it brings people closer to the land. Like, someone could donate to some project, like, oh yeah, that's great that I'm donating to this thing. And that's awesome. I think people should do that. And I think way more people would donate if it's like, yeah, I'm donating to this thing because like that's my land right there. And I take part in it. I am a part of it. I go out there and that's where I get these mushrooms. That's where I get these plants. And they feel like they're one and the same with it. Because in many ways, we are that exactly.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And like, I quit spraying my lawn, started letting native species come back and start flourishing. It was years ago, and I never truly was like a super well manicured lawn. It didn't look like a golf course, but compared to what it looks like now, is a lot different. And if you have somebody that's in that monoculture mindset that comes over and they look at it, it probably drives them nuts. But at the same time, I don't have to worry about bending over and picking something and putting it in my mouth because I'm not doing anything to it. And it's been quite a while since that. But the diversity in all the plants that are there now is absolutely astonishing. And to see, not only dandelions, but the violets coming back and everything that you can, possibly think of throughout the different seasons, it's starting to be there. And it's amazing.
Right. Yeah, it's funny because I remembered just like encountering a friend of mine's mom, like back when I was in college. And we were on the college campus and there was these clovers that were growing on the lawn. And she was remarking about how ugly the clovers were. And it's so funny because it kind of is what you're talking about with the monoculture mindset. But I think that that's a very unnatural thing, because if I were to like pick a clover and show it to you and be like, wow, look at this flower. Like, yeah, that's a beautiful flower. In fact, so I was actually born in Canada, and my family moved down to, I'm in Alabama now. So we moved down to Alabama when I was very young. And there's a very common, what many would call weed down here, henbit and purple dead nettle. And when we first found them, my mom would pick them and put them into a vase because she thought they were beautiful. And people would see them and be like, oh my gosh, why did you pick this weed? And it's just funny. It's all about perspective. To her, it wasn't a weed. It was this new, beautiful, and they are very beautiful purple flower. It wasn't a weed. So yeah, when we, and that's another part of it is, so there's a piece of land close to me that a friend took me to recently, several years back. And it was one of the most amazing ginseng patches I'd ever seen in my life. And not just ginseng. I mean, the amount of fungal diversity there and biodiversity was crazy. And so for someone to take you to their ginseng patch, that's kind of a big deal because it's a very rare plant. And yeah, as people should be very careful with that, as they should. And he said, "Yeah, I'm taking you here because in a couple months this is going to be developed, and it'll all be gone." And so that was a really sad moment. And sure enough, it's gone now. It's not there anymore. And I talked to people about that, and the answer is, of course, because to most people, that land only had value in what you could turn it into houses and sell it for. That's the only value that it had. And if we kind of flip that narrative and we collectively learn, no, there's way more value in it beyond just being able to be used for timber or turn into a house or turn into a parking lot or whatever it might be. There's value in it just the way it is. I think that starts to change the story and we start to really see things differently. But we have to know that it's there. And that's why I'm so passionate about teaching this stuff and trying to reach as many people as I possibly can.
Yeah, that it kind of reminds me of, I was talking to my dad and showing him some different plants. He's like, "You better be careful. You're going to poison yourself with all of this stuff." And I said, "What do you think you're doing with all the food that you're getting from all these modern agriculture places and the grocery stores?" I said, "What do you think you're doing?" I said, "And then you see this," and I picked up some ground ivy, and I said, "This can actually help cleanse your body and remove heavy metals." And he's like, "Wow, I didn't know that." And I said, "Yeah, that's the relationship that we've lost. The relationship with all of these plants that, some cultures, they spoke to them. They had a different relationship than other cultures, but everybody knew how to utilize them and to the best of their ability and had a relationship with them that we don't have anymore. And that disconnect really, really takes away from their value. And just like you said, if you have that disconnect, they have no value to anybody. And then they just bulldoze it over and it's gone forever. It's pretty sad.
And I think it does not take many generations being removed from that practice to where it's really gone. And I mean, how many generations of people living with these plants did it take for us to learn these things and form these relationships? And if it's gone, then it's going to take that again to get them back. So I'm really big about people who are also teaching kids about this stuff. And I work with my local land trust and I get to do some kids programs with them. And I love to get to do those. And it's funny, I did one teaching mushrooms to kids. And, parents are there making sure that everyone's safe, make sure to tell the kids, don't put any of the mushrooms in your mouth, that kind of thing, right? Because outside of that, there's not really concern safety-wise. It's mainly just ingestion.
Right.
We don't want to eat something that we don't know or haven't cooked. But it's like, so I would tell them stories. I brought the mushroom, like a big Amanita muscaria mushroom cap, and they all lit up because they recognized it from Mario. I could tell, a lot of them were really into video games,
Yeah.
but then I would tell them a little bit about mushrooms, and it's like, okay, now we're going to go and find some. And just hearing the first kid like, "Oh, I found one. And just to get to experience that excitement of like, I told you about this thing, it's a mushroom, and maybe you'd seen mushrooms your whole life, but now it's this interesting thing. Now there's intrigue. It's something that you are curious about. And yeah, just getting to see that is really rewarding and exciting.
Absolutely. The other day it was pretty flattering. My middle child told me, she goes, "Daddy, you know an awful lot of," or what'd she say? She said, "You know about every plant there is." And I go, "Honey, I wish." I said, "Thank you, but that's not even close." And I said, "I have friends that know so much more than me that they could tell you almost every plant in this yard. And I said, there's even more plants than that people don't know. And they were like, whoa. It just totally blew their mind, and see their little faces try and wrap their head around that. It was pretty cool. But it brings me to a question that I need to ask you. So, do you think it was intentional to put the Amanita muscaria in Mario Brothers? Like, was there a significance there, do you think, or just because it was recognizable?
That's a really good question. I have not ever encountered that question before. And the short answer is I don't know. But the longer answer is I'm very intrigued and I would like to think about that more. Because, surely they wouldn't just they wouldn't just pick the mushroom at random to throw in there.
Right. Throw a chanterelle in there and it wouldn't be the same. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's other mushrooms out there that are equally, chanterelles are vibrant, indigo milk cap, very, very beautiful blue color. There's all these things that they could have chose, but yeah, they chose Amanita muscaria. And now, of course, it's one of the most iconic mushrooms in the world. But I've researched that mushroom to some extent, and of course, there's a lot of culture around that mushroom to begin with, and so maybe that's what drew them to it in the first place. But that's a good question.
And the effects that the mushroom has on Mario also kind of symbolizes that he gets bigger and stronger all of a sudden. Was it like a berserker type link to it? Maybe, I don't know. That's kind of my thoughts on it. But we'll table that one, and you can ponder it. But I've noticed a lot of the stuff you do revolves around taking things that aren't necessarily, utilized for foraging, or they don't have any significance or great purpose. I mean, yes, you can eat them, but they don't taste that great, and stuff like that. Like making teas. What kind of drove you towards doing that?
Yeah, I think so. One of the first things is that I like to, in my personal life of foraging, not just like what I take pictures of or like to teach people about, but what I actually forage for. I really like to forage for things that I can get a lot of, because I want to be able to store it. I want to be able to use it for a long time, and I want to be able to get an amount where it's like I'm not just tasting it one time, or I'm not making one meal, but I can like really incorporate it into my life. And one of those things was cleavers. Like there's in my backyard hundreds of them. They grow abundantly, and I'd seen a lot of different recipes and things of how to use cleavers. I tried eating them, not very good. I tried to make the pesto. I didn't do it correctly. I need to try again at that one because it didn't work very well the way that I tried. And I was like, well, I'm also into herbalism. So I was like, let me see if I can make a tea out of this. So I tried to make it with fresh. Not very good. Okay, that didn't work. And then I said, let me try to dry it. Because a lot of times with purple dead nettle, fresh tea, don't like it at all.
Mm-hmm.
But if I dry purple dead nettle and make a tea with it, it's incredible. It's one of my favorite teas.
It smells terrible.
So I tried that with the cleavers.
It smells terrible when you dry it, but it just has a weird, strange smell to it.
Yeah, and I don't know, like different.
Like it's not
know,
a becoming, it's not like a becoming mint to where you're like, oh, that's so nicely fragrant. It's like, what is this?
Yeah, I think the reason that I like it is because I really like stinging nettle tea, and I was drinking stinging nettle tea before I even got into foraging, really, and it reminds me of stinging nettle tea in some ways, like of I don't know, it's like a hearty, nourishing kind of flavor is my best way of describing it. So I digress. I tried to dry the cleavers and make a tea with that. It was also really bad. So I'm like, well, I think that I might be out of options here. And I don't know where the idea came from, but I was like, what if I roasted it? And so I tried that and finally had a hit. And it was actually really good. I enjoyed it. I would describe it as being similar to roasted dandelion root tea, But for me, it was a success. I found this thing. It grows extremely abundantly on my land. I want to, incorporate myself into my land. And so I found these cleavers. And if I dry them and roast them, it makes something really, really good. So with a lot of things, I think the same thing could probably be said for hunting. I've heard of, certain animals that people say like, oh, that's a trash animal or that's a trash fish. And a lot of times it's just, no, it's just that, the normal way that we cook things doesn't work very well for that thing, but typically there is a process or there is a way to bring out the best in whatever that ingredient, whatever that specimen might be.
I totally agree. And like one example of that is a carp. A lot of people don't like it. I've never had a desire to eat it. And then one day a buddy's like, hey, I brined it and smoked it. Give it a try. And I tried it. And I was like, I mean, a little bit of a slight fishy taste, but still not bad. I mean, still very palatable. You could put it on a cracker and eat it. And I was like, wow, okay. Maybe they're not that bad. I mean, it's an abundant resource. Why not go take a couple and do that and then, vacuum seal them and put them in the freezer and pull it out whenever and don't tell people. Just lay that slab of fish out and let them start picking it off the bones and then tell them, hey, that's carp. And they'll be like, what? So different things like that are a great way to, slowly introduce somebody and not even let them know, almost dupe them. And then they realize that it's not a trash fish or trash animal. I totally agree with that. So I got to ask you though, so when you roast it, like how did you roast it? How did you go about that?
Yeah, so I harvested all of the cleaver and then I dehydrated it. By the way, for anyone who's getting into foraging, a dehydrator is an amazing tool. When I first started, I lost a bunch of what I foraged for because I was trying to dehydrate it like out in the sun and then, it would rain and I just could never keep up with it really well. But a good dehydrator, I throw it in there and it gets dried and I don't have to think about it. So that's a really great tool for anyone who's getting into foraging. So I dry it and then I actually grind it up into a powder and just throw the powder dry into a cast iron skillet. And then I would put it on a really low temperature and I stir it very constantly and then just let it kind of roast until it got to basically a darkness that I thought was good. And then take it off and there you go. Then I would use that kind of powder in a tea.
Nice. So one of the other things I saw that you do is you took fleabane and did you not? I mean, you made a tea with that, right? I thought there was nothing you could do with fleabane. I didn't even know. Is it actually edible?
It's one of those. It is edible, but I don't like it. So
It's a fibrous flower, right? With a very, very fibrous stem, stalk, whatever. I don't know the proper botanist term, but
right, yeah, and the leaves are edible too, and I tried those, and they're okay, but they're not anything that I would go out of my way to consume. But yeah, I made a tea with the flowers, and it turned out to be not that bad. It does require so. With many other things in the aster family, there's a bit of an astringency to it, so it does well with some sweetening. But the floral flavor, just base floral flavor, is actually really, really nice. I was surprised by that. I wasn't expecting it. A friend of mine actually recommended that one to me that I try it. So I said, okay, why not? And it turned out to be quite good.
So is fleabane actually like the bane of fleas? Will it? I know somebody once told me that people used to keep that around their house or around their pets so that would actually keep fleas away. Is that something that you think is or do you know of that is an actual truth to that?
So yeah, I looked into that one, and yeah, and there's also ideas that I think they would use it around cattle or things like that to keep fleas off of the cattle. From what I can tell, it's more urban myth than it is a thing that actually works. But yet the name sticks around, and that's still, at least here where I am, that's the primary name that I think people use
Right.
by it.
Right. And I believe by me as well, it's fleabane. So what's some other obscure things or things that aren't kind of in the norm that you've made teas out of?
So Another one that it's on my mind recently because I've been doing a lot of projects with it is wild lettuce. And so
Mm.
this again is kind of in the vein of more of the herbal side of projects. Within foraging, I would divide it into kind of culinary edible uses, and then we have herbal medicinal type uses, and then another one would be even like functional uses, like foraging for making a bow drill or for making shelter, things like that. So this would still fall under the medicinal side. And actually, so when I was in college, and still sometimes now, I had insomnia quite often. I'd have a lot of difficulty sleeping, and I was into a lot of herbs at the time, so I tried all the things that people typically recommend. I tried chamomile, and I tried valerian, and I tried tart cherry, and all these different things, and nothing really worked. And then I ran into wild lettuce, and people talked about how this wild form of lettuce is helpful for sleep. I said, okay. And so I tried to make a tea out of that. And by the way, this tea isn't very good. This is more of good medicine than good flavor because it's extremely bitter. And that one actually worked pretty well for me. And I've taken that, and now I don't really make a tea anymore. Now I make a concentrated extract. I actually just made a video about that one on that I put on YouTube. But yeah, it's one of those things that I developed a relationship with it very quickly because that plant helped me a lot in what I was dealing with at the time. And so for someone else, when they approach foraging, it'll be something completely different. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about foraging is that for everyone that gets into it, it's going to take a completely different direction from mine that I took.
So was that actually like the thing that brought you into foraging, or was that? I mean, was that the moment? Was that the big aha? That's
That actually wasn't the moment, but I can tell you what the moment was. I've mentioned it was also while I was at college, and I went to Auburn University. And Auburn University is known for their oak trees. They have tons of oak trees all over the campus. And so, every day I'd be in my labs. I was studying electrical engineering, so that was a lot of fun. But then I was also really getting into nature connection, and I was getting into survival skills and things like that, and learning about how important nature was for me, and so on. But at the time, it was like I knew that nature was good for me, and I should be going outside more. I should be getting out into nature more. But it was like a thing that I had to do. Well, at the same time, I started listening to this podcast called the Rewild Yourself podcast. Many people who listen to this one maybe have encountered that one before with Daniel Vitalis. And he would do these monologues before the main episode. And he was talking about how he would go out and forage for acorns, and he was going to use them for food. Like, that's kind of strange. And so I'd listen to this and I'd listen to it. And finally one day I was like, I'm going to try it. Sure. So I biked down the street, and there was very easily found a beautiful red oak with huge acorns. And so I harvested like a 3-gallon bucket full of these acorns. I was like, awesome. Okay, well, now I have to do something with this. So then I learned how to dry them. I learned how to process them. And before I knew it, I had this flour. And I was like, great. Well, now I got to make bread. And I'm not a baker, by the way, but I attempted this bread that I made with these acorns. And I took my first bite. And then I thought back, and I thought about how I had gone out. I'd picked these acorns up off the ground. I'd processed them with my own hands, turned them into this flour, baked it into this bread that I'm now eating, and it's delicious. And that was the moment that I was hooked. And now I wanted to know, if this is so good, what else is out there? And I have not stopped that search since.
So my first venture into it was actually mushrooms. And
after years of fine print contracts and getting ripped off by overpriced wireless providers, if we've learned anything, it's that there's always a catch. So when I heard that for a limited time, all Mint Mobile wireless plans are $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan, I thought, what's the catch? But after talking to them, it all made sense. There isn't one. Mint Mobile's secret sauce is that they sell wireless service online. They cut out the cost of retail stores and pass those sweet savings directly to you. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. To get this new customer offer, go to mintmobile.com/waypoint. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
The first one, of course, the most common, morels. But then after that, it started to become a struggle, and it's like, man, so many people hit the woods, find these morels, and just sometimes even decimate areas, trampling over other things. And I saw that, and I was like, man, that's terrible. What else is there, though? What else should I be looking for? What could I be looking for? And so that kind of made me dive into the mushroom world. But I still didn't get into other things until I was sitting in the tree stand one day. And as your mind wanders, waiting for deer to come in, you start thinking about things. And I started looking around, and I'm like, I can hardly identify anything in these woods. Like, I know that's honeysuckle over there. You know, it's invasive. Didn't know the extent that it actually does to all these, native plants, but I didn't know much else. And I was like, that's terrible. Like, how much food is all around me while I'm waiting for this food to come to me? What's out there? And at that moment was when I was like, I need to know more. And that's when I started getting into it. And that's how it happened. And then now it's like, I'm sitting in the tree stand trying to ID plants, and then I'll look around and I'll see something on a tree like really far off. And I'll pull out my binoculars and I'll look, and I'm like, oh, it is chicken of the woods. Or is that a hen of the woods at the base of that oak tree way over there? And I can't tell. Maybe it's just dirt. I don't know. Maybe it's leaves. And then I get out the binoculars and look, and I'm like, well, I know where I'm going as soon as I get down. And that feeling to know that I can see those things and identify those things now is amazing. It's so cool.
Absolutely. And it's something that I feel the same way about that pattern recognition of like, that's not just some orange stuff over there.
Mm-hmm.
That could be chicken of the woods, or this kind of like golden layer that's scattered across the forest floor. Like those could be chanterelles or hen of the woods. And it's what I call developing forager's eyes. And the pattern recognition of the things that you're looking for actually happens remarkably fast. So that story that I told, I started foraging in my 20s. And before then, I didn't grow up into plants. I didn't grow up into mushrooms or hunting or I went hiking with my family a bunch, and we would go birding and stuff, but I didn't know anything about plants. But you pick it up very quickly. You start to learn the patterns of the things that you want to look for. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I recognize that one. I recognize that one. Like I'm passing by a tree, like, oh, I think that's a mulberry tree. Oh, that is a mulberry tree. Mm-hmm. And it all just starts to fall into place. I think that there's something deep within us. There's something very human about the practice of foraging, that we actually learn it much faster than we might think. It can be a little bit of a struggle at first, but it happens faster than one might think.
Absolutely. I think it's so cool though. Like you talk about that story about getting the bread and making that bread and then thinking back. And it's something that like, not only are you thinking back, but you feel that connection that you went and you touched those. You had them from every state of their being to where they were. And then you recalled, but not only that, like you made that connection with nature that so many people are lacking. And if they have that, it brings a deeper sense of meaning and a deeper sense of understanding that now you are developing, like we talked about earlier, that relationship with those plants and so many things around us. I mean, and when the mulberries are just starting to finish off, that the black raspberries are going to be in full bloom soon. And all those things just tie together, and one comes after another, and it's this balance. It's this amazing balance that everything works together, and we're just there. We're no longer in it. We're no longer are we a participant of that environment. We're just a spectator. And to put yourself in it, and have your hands in there and get pricked, and when you're pulling stinging nettles and doing all those things, that's the connection, that sense of meaning and purpose that so many people are lacking. And it's amazing to see when other people, everybody finds that, and that moment that ties them to it, and then all of a sudden it just opens up this awareness of everything else kind of around you, and you're more receptive to go and learn all these other things. It's so awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, it absolutely is. And just like the memory, because you were talking about, recalling of how you forge for something. Like to this day, my campus, I can tell you where things are in relation to where that oak tree was that was like really prolific with acorns, or a really good spot that had pine branches that went down far enough that I could collect pine pollen. And it's just like I can see exactly where those places are, and just places that I've been where I foraged. It's like I can walk back through that place, through the story that happened of when I was out foraging there.
So one of the things you mentioned earlier, and I got to ask you about this, you mentioned learning survivalist skills, and I'm kind of curious whether it was like a survivalist mindset and trying to have like a sense of preparedness, because I find that people that do that really limit themselves because they don't have that relationship that we just talked about. And if you develop that relationship, it's no longer about survival, but you have those skills because you have that relationship.
Yeah, so in my particular instance, it was a friend of mine was into survival skills. So fire making skills or building natural shelter, things like that. And for me, it was cool and it was interesting, but it didn't kind of light me up with excitement the way that foraging does. And I think part of it is not that there's anything
Right.
like wrong with those skills. Like they're awesome and they're really interesting, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole in of itself. But I think for me, the reason why foraging just like was addicting in many ways, it's like a treasure hunt. Like every single time that I go out in the woods, I could find like really awesome treasure this time. It could be chanterelles or chicken in the woods, or also for me one of the biggest mushroom prizes of them all, morels. They don't really grow much around me, unfortunately, but I
Oh
can
man.
find one or two every year, maybe if I'm lucky. But yeah, it just you could, from that moment on, you could not keep me out of the woods. But yeah, the general kind of, a lot of times what I see in that survivalist mentality that I think you might have been alluding to is almost as if you are making a spaceship, and when you go out, you have on an astronaut suit, and you have not connected yourself to the land, but you've actually kind of isolated yourself from it. Like, I'm gonna get all these things, and I'm good. I have what I need, and that's it. But that's really cutting yourself off from a lot that's around you that could make that job tremendously easier if you were to open yourself up to it more and explore it more.
Yes. So one of the things you also mentioned was a bow drill, and foraging for an item to build a bow drill. In my mind, and tell me if this is what you were alluding to or not, but I think of like mullein. What was your plant that you were kind of talking about when you mentioned the bow drill?
So two come to mind. The first one
Or
was
a
the
hand
one that
drill.
we,
Sorry.
yeah. So well, I've actually only done bow drill before, and like preface, I am very much a beginner when it comes to survival skills. I still have yet to like really dive into that skill set and give it the credit that it deserves. So I'm hugely a beginner. The first class that I did, the wood of choice was pine, which was kind of on hard mode. It was extremely difficult. And then the other one that immediately comes to mind in my area would be tulip poplar. is from what my friend who's way more into this than I am tells me is a very good wood for making a bow drill.
Yeah, I was thinking hand drill in my mind to actually rub it in your hands and have the.
Yeah, I haven't gone down that rabbit hole quite yet, but I want to one day.
And the one thing I think is like it's not necessarily like survival skills. I mean, yes, in a survival situation that would be like extremely helpful, but more primitive or even bushcraft type mentality to where it's just woodsmanship at that point, right? We're
Right.
learning just like the foraging. You're learning skills that are long forgotten by most, and you're just rewilding yourself to those. So it's pretty cool to think
Yeah,
about that.
absolutely. Like base human skills,
Yeah.
right? If I need to survive or not, I want to know how to do this as a human, as like the history of fire with being a human.
Yeah. So I got to ask you though, the wild lettuce. We're gonna go way back to that because in my mind
Okay.
it kind of reminds me of like almost like harvesting opium. Like when you see it, like the process seems very similar.
Yes, and preface, I have not harvested opium before,
Nor have
but
I.
I
But
know of, yes, I know of the compounds and the process, and there is a particular reason for why it seems so similar. So with both wild lettuce and with opium poppies, uh, as it seems, what you're after, or the plant has within it a latex, and when you gather the plant and then harvest it and process it and typically kind of like boil it down or concentrate it down, what you end up with is a very resinous type final product. The same thing actually happens with something like sweet gum, which is a very resinous tree. And I've done experiments with sweet gum before where I concentrate that one down, and it results in, I mean, if I were to show sweet gum extract to you and wild lettuce extract the way that I extract it, I don't think that you could tell the difference. Maybe smell would be a giveaway, but it largely ends up with the same product. And that's because at their base, they have latex in them. And so if someone's thinking latex like latex gloves, that is along the right lines because that's the same thing that's in rubber tree. I also I get a question a lot about, oh, if I'm allergic to latex rubber gloves, would I be allergic to wild lettuce? And the answer is probably not based on the allergy to latex gloves, because that's typically an allergy to the proteins in rubber tree, the Hevea genus. And people who are allergic to that often don't react to the latex that's produced in aster plants, wild lettuce being the aster family.
so I do know of an individual, and I think he would probably fall in that category, not with the rubber tree, but he actually has a food latex allergy, which includes like green peppers or red peppers and things of that nature that actually have a natural latex in them that I did not know about.
Yeah, and some people have contact dermatitis with the latex in the plants in the aster family. So yeah, it's something that this also gets into the safety of foraging. So if you start foraging for the first time, whether it's for plants or mushrooms, you're going to be consuming completely new species than ones that you've ever had before because you can't find them in the grocery store in any form or fashion.
Hmm.
And so I always encourage people, if it's something completely new to you, try a little bit first because you never know if you might have had some allergy that you just did not know about. So try a little bit, and then if everything seems safe, try a little bit more, and continue on from that point.
Yeah, that's definitely great advice. So when you're doing the concentrating, like how is that process? Like how long does it actually take? What does it entail?
So from beginning to end, for my process, it's starting off with dry material and extracting with alcohol first, and then adding water after. I find that it makes it a lot stronger if I do it that way. And then I'm straining out the plant material. So now I have like a bunch of liquid, and then I allow that to evaporate off for a certain period of time until it gets to a small enough amount of liquid that I can pour it into a silicone pad that I put into a dehydrator. And then I throw in a dehydrator at about 135 degrees, and I let the rest of the liquid evaporate off from there. So if you don't include, so like a lot of times I leave it to extract in the alcohol for several days, just because I'm not in a rush and it's going to extract a little bit more that way. But if you don't include that like active time of extracting, then I don't know, it would take around maybe 4 hours or so. But even then, a lot of time of that is just waiting for it to evaporate off or dry up further.
So when you're doing this to the wild lettuce, are you like taking a razor blade and slicing it just like like you would for a poppy? I mean, the process is the same, and then you're taking that latex that has oozed out and dried up, right? And then you're breaking that down, or are you taking the whole plant and extracting?
That's a good question. And I'm taking the whole plant. And initially, I saw people talk about harvesting the latex in isolation. That's a good way to spend a long time not getting much out of it.
Right. Unless you have a huge patch and you just have people with razor blades slicing everywhere.
Yeah, even then, I remember I tried that for a little bit. I was like, this is not working. And I also kind of realized, like, well, if I take the whole plant, the latex is in there, so it's not like it's going anywhere. So yeah, I always harvest whole plant. It is way more efficient that way. And in many other ways, like for all we know, there are other compounds in the plant beyond what's just in the latex that are important to the herbal effects that we see in it. So I don't want to lose those. So I always go for the whole plant.
And you just basically chop it up, put it in an alcohol, extract stuff from it, right? And then dilute with water. Or do you cover it with, is it pure alcohol at first or is it water?
I do pure alcohol first, and then I do water second. Sometimes I start with just the fresh leaves, and then other times, in my preferred, I actually dry the leaves first, because then when it's extracting the alcohol, the ratio of alcohol is higher because there's a little bit of water in the fresh leaves. So
Okay.
that's my complete preferred method. But if I'm in a pinch, then sure, I'll throw the alcohol straight on the fresh leaves. I'll blend them up, and then I'll just leave it to extract a little bit that way, and then continue on with the rest of the process.
How long does it actually sit in the alcohol?
I leave in alcohol for several days.
Like
But I think
30
that
or what are we talking?
yeah, so probably 4 days to a week
Okay.
or so. It could be longer. It probably could be a little bit shorter. And I think it would still, we'd be talking about, I think, differences in percentage of effectiveness, not like whole factors of difference in effectiveness.
Okay. And then, I mean, so once you do this, because I've seen the final product that you do, and to me it looks like something else that you might get in a lot of trouble for. I mean, it does look like a black rock.
Yeah, and I think that's just dealing with that's what things look like when you take a resinous plant.
Yep.
And you concentrate it down. That's just kind of and probably a lot of that has to do with the oxidation process. It's just going to end up with a color that looks like that. Like I mentioned, sweet gum looks exactly the same. And it was kind of cool when I extracted it the first time. I was like, oh, wow, it's just like wild lettuce.
So the sweet gum, we're going to come back to the wild lettuce because I still have some more questions.
Okay.
But the sweet gum, what was the intent or purpose behind doing the extraction process to that? Was it like medicinal properties for a certain thing? Like I believe I've heard that sweet gum, like the ball of the sweet gum, can actually be used and extract things, and it has basically the same compounds as like Tamiflu. Is that correct?
Okay, so that gets into a rabbit hole that I have gone way too far down.
Okay.
So I'll get into a little bit, and then you let me know how far we want to go.
Okay.
So the answer to that question overall is no. And so the high level idea is that sweet gum, the infertile seeds of sweet gum, contain a chemical called shikimic acid. It's actually in many different plants. Star anise is one that it's highly concentrated in. And shikimic acid is used as what essentially amounts to chemical scaffolding to make oseltamivir, which is the chemical name for the drug called Tamiflu. And the first time that I was taught this, I was told, yeah, so like this thing, it's in Tamiflu, And it's not the drug. It doesn't work quite as well, but it works pretty well. And so I was like, okay, cool. But what happened was I was looking up, when I'm doing research for an herb, I always look up traditional uses for it because I want to know, how did the native people of this area actually use it? What were their extraction methods? Like, I want to learn as much as I can. And I looked up a little bit and I couldn't find anything. They didn't use the sweet gum balls or the seeds in any way. It's like, that's interesting. So I kept digging and I kept digging and I couldn't find anything at all. I was like, what's going on here? Why would they have not used this? And come to find out, that piece of information that shikimic acid is in Tamiflu is technically not right. Shikimic acid is used to make Tamiflu, but it's not in Tamiflu. That nothing about shikimic acid is Tamiflu. So my wife and I did a lengthy project where we investigated this even more. And part of that was getting into other uses of sweet gum, and not in North America, but actually in Chinese medicine, of a tree in the sweet gum genus, Liquidabar occidentalis, I think. They used the dried balls of sweet gum for flu-like symptoms or cold-like symptoms. And I also want to preface that sweet gum, the plant, is used for cold symptoms and was used for native people, just not the part that you often see in this modern, a lot of modern herbalists talk about. So, but in Chinese herbalism, they use the dry balls of sweet gum. So we're like, oh, cool, let's try this. And we got a bunch of dried sweet gum balls and we concentrated that one down. And one really cool thing is that our house smelled like Christmas, as a really nice kind of Christmassy aroma that comes with it. But part of it was that we were showing that the concentrations that they were talking about using would not correlate to what people were claiming about shikimic acid. And further, the dried sweet gum balls don't have any of the infertile seeds left in them. So it was a different avenue that we were investigating. But that was part of the research for that project.
Cool. So have you used it for anything? And did it help? What's your personal basis, not actual like scientific data, but your own personal basis on that? Have you used it?
With sweet gum?
Yes.
We did not use that one at the time, partially because I didn't know enough about it. I didn't know how concentrated of a thing that I had just made, and I hadn't investigated the Chinese medicine uses of it enough to know that what I was doing was going to be safe. So I haven't used it so much in that way. I've made teas of the leaves before, and they taste. They kind of have that piney flavor, the kind of like Christmassy aroma that I was describing. They taste medicinal. I didn't observe anything profoundly strong with them, but I have not personally used it to a large extent at this point in my journey with that plant.
Interesting. So now the wild lettuce.
Okay.
How do you use that? And then you told earlier that you use it for insomnia. What are its effects? What does it feel like? What does it do to you? What is it? And does it have different purposes if it were in higher percentages or doses?
So for me, what I do, so I concentrated down to that resin that we were talking about. The great thing about the resin is that it's extremely shelf stable. The not so great thing about it is that it's kind of a pain to take it that way. Like, I guess you kind of cut a little piece off and eat it, but that also, I don't know, it's just tedious to me. What I want is something that I can take kind of like I would take a tincture. So I actually dilute it in vodka. I got this tip from Sam Kaufman, who also made a video about wild lettuce. I was like, that's a great idea. So I dilute it in vodka, and that way remain shelf stable, but I can take it very easily. So I take in dose what's the equivalent of what I started with in dried herb, of around 2 to 3 grams. That's how much that I take. That could have a lot to do with the strength of the extraction that I make. So for what someone produces, it's going to vary a lot, and you might have to try to start with a small amount and increase. So the way that it feels for me, effectively, it just makes me really tired. Like
Like opiate makes you tired or different?
So, the feeling of when like you've worked really hard or you've done a lot of physical exercise and you lay down in bed and like I'm going to get to sleep really easily. I'm not going to have a problem getting to sleep tonight. It gets me to that place where, for me, someone who has insomnia, it's like you lay down, you're like, it's going to be a struggle getting to sleep tonight. Like, I don't feel tired at all. My mind is racing. This is going to be difficult. And so, yeah, that's the best way that I can describe it, is that it kind of brings me to that place where I'm like, I've exerted myself a lot today and I'm going to be able to get to sleep. That's for me. And I also want to preface, like, this is N equals 1. That's just my personal, what the herb does for me. And drugs and plants alike, we observe them doing completely different things in different people. So another one that it's known for is having pain relieving effects. And for me personally, I have not really experienced those properties of the herb before. I haven't noticed it where if I have a part of me that's hurting, that it is helping with that. But a lot of people have commented on videos that I made about identifying the herb or using the herb, and they said that it works for them. So for some people claim that it does have that effect for them.
I wonder if maybe it is actual higher dose or more concentrated dose than maybe what you are utilizing. I'm so curious now about it. I have to dive in and learn more.
It's so there's so two chemicals that we actually know about in wild lettuce, and with one of them, the effect makes a lot of sense. So lactucin is the name of one of them, and it is a adenosine agonist, and that's a fancy term. So I call it inverse caffeine. Caffeine is an adenosine antagonist, and the way that caffeine works is it binds to adenosine receptors, so that I'm not going to explain this technically correct preface, but so that essentially they can't be activated in your body. And adenosine is one of the things that's responsible for giving you the feeling of being tired. So when we drink caffeine, those chemicals can't get to where they need to get to, or adenosine can't get where it needs to get to, and so it kind of delays feeling tired. It's another reason why people who drink caffeine in the morning may experience a caffeine crash, is because when the caffeine wears off, that adenosine didn't go anywhere, and so it kind of rushes into the site, so you can feel an overwhelming sense of being tired. And then the other one is called lactocopicrin, and it is an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. And I don't know this one to a large extent. It's kind of interesting because that same thing is used for nerve gas, and it's also used for some insecticides, because if you take too much of an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, it's part of what allows your body to relax its muscles. And so essentially you just contract your muscles and you can't uncontract them. And in high enough doses, that can be fatal. So
Convulse.
That's an interesting thing, that's what it does. Nicotine is also an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. And if we think about the plant having a defense mechanism, particularly against insects, that makes a lot of sense. So if plants have these, that makes sense in terms of their natural ecology, their natural defense mechanisms. People also report that nicotine has analgesic or pain relieving like effects. So I think that may be what's going on there. But that's conjecture on my part. I'm not 100% sure about that one. But when I discovered it first, I was like, this doesn't seem like it would make me tired at all. This makes me seem like it would be the opposite. But again, the whole plant, for me, that's what it does. So who knows? I don't know.
That's pretty cool. No, you never know. So just kind of out of curiosity, though, does it have any, like you talked about the potential bad things, but have you ever experienced any like side effects or anything to where, like, for instance, sometimes I have a hard time falling asleep. My nose is a little stuffy anyway or something, or scratchy. I'll go take a couple Benadryl. If you stay up past that point of the tiredness with the Benadryl, it has a reverse effect. Now all of a sudden you're wired, you're wide awake, and you're going, well, that was stupid. So, I mean, did you ever experience anything like that with it?
I have not experienced anything like that with it yet, which I'm thankful for. But like I said, that's N equals 1. That's just for me. So with any herb, with any new thing that you're trying, caution is always advised, and making sure that you do your research. And another one is I sound like kind of your classic, like a commercial, but like talking with your doctor. So St. John's wort is one that a lot of people will go to and they'll take because, like, hey, it's an herb, and I've heard that it can help with certain things, so I'll take this. Well, St. John's wort is again, fancy technical terms, it's an inducer of the CYP3A4 pathway, which basically is a enzyme in your liver that's responsible for metabolizing a lot of drugs, such as heart medication and immunosuppressants and birth control. And so if all of a sudden your liver is way more efficient at metabolizing those things and inactivating them as it used to be, maybe your heart medication won't work, or maybe your immunosuppressant won't work, or your birth control won't work, or something like that. So just because it's an herb, just because it's natural, doesn't mean that there can be dangerous interactions or side effects. So caution is always recommended. Research is always recommended.
Wonderful. And I think that's actually a good segue into the end here with your PSA of warning to everyone. So can you kind of, as we wrap this up, can you tell everybody where they can find you and your content, and maybe get a hold of you or whatever if they'd like to learn more or see all your content?
Absolutely. So the place that I hold closest to my heart is my YouTube channel. That's where I post videos about how to use different plants, how to identify them. I post both long form and short form content on my YouTube channel. And additionally, I post some extra pictures and stuff that aren't on my YouTube on my Instagram. And then for longer articles and things like that, I have some articles that I think hunters would find particularly helpful, or people who are on public land, because it's an article about how to navigate all the different nuances of the rules and regulations on public land and foraging. That can be found on my website. That's feralforaging.com.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I wish we would have kind of gotten into that, but we could probably talk for hours otherwise. So
absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And once again, thank you so much for listening to the Publicly Challenged podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please subscribe on whatever platform it is you're listening to. Also, if you could leave a review, that would help us out. And you can check us out on Instagram or at publiclychallenged.com. And once again, thank you so much for listening to the show.